Alright, so today we're going to build some El Cheapo ground mount solar mounts for east and west facing panels that need to be at a nice angle to pick up the sun from the low angles that the sun is early in the morning and late in the afternoon. I'm Andy and we're going to build these things. So what do we got? Get that out of the way. So in order to build one of these panels, I use these 3x4 by 8 foot treated landscape timbers. The reason I use these is they're normally anywhere between $4 to $6 a piece. Sometimes Lowe's has them on sale, usually spring, early fall, for landscaping projects, and at that time you can get them for $2 to $3 a board. You could also do the same thing out of 4x4s. If you've got 4x4s, they just cost a little bit more. So, in order to build one of these, you need, for the type that I'm building, you need 5 of these. So, these two here will be chopped down. These are going to be our L's for our 2 sides. You need 2 more that will be the brace across the front of those L's, and then you need 1 more that's going to be on the bottom. In addition to that, you need 3 2x4 by 10s. If you're going to do a wider panels that need up more, you could always use 2x4 by 12s or 2x4 by 16s. This is just the base of your array to support this. If you're doing this, I would also recommend try and do this, spring or fall when it's cooler outside, rather than the middle of July when it's not so cold. And I definitely recommend the tasty beverage. All right, so first things first. Now for the L's that I do, I normally do a 3-foot section and then a 5-foot section. Now you don't have to be 100% perfect on these things, because none of this stuff is going to be 100% perfect. Just has to be pretty close. So this one's 8 foot. This guy's right at 8 foot. Sometimes they can be off by as much as 1/4 to 1/2. I'm going to mark these guys both at the 3-foot mark. And what that gives us is a 3-foot base butted up against a 5-foot back. And that gives you a fairly decent angle for picking up the sun when the sun's low on the horizon, either direction. So, the ideal array of tools for this, if you got them, chop saw or miter saw, some sort of circular saw. I have the little Sawzall, and I'll show you why later. And of course, cordless drill. And then I'm using 3-inch deck screws. You can use lag bolts. I've used lag bolts to put these guys together before, if you happen to have a bunch of lag bolts laying around. The other thing that you're going to need is some sort of L bracket for tying the back corner of that together. In the case of this, I've used, in the past, I've used Super Strut, the 4-hole L's. Those work really great, but they're a little on the pricey side these days. I have these guys here, which is basically, this is normally a bracket like that I just took on my bandsaw and cut it in half, so I got 2 out of them. You want the thicker ones, you don't want the really thin ones, because you want it to have enough strength that it's not going to easily flex back and forth. So, let's go about chopping these things down and turning them into something. Alright. So, line this guy up. first one. And of course, always remember the golden rule. You know, measure twice, cut once, or double check your measurements so you don't have to end up throwing out boards. All right, so there's those. Throwing these guys together, pretty straightforward. The way these guys are going to work, you're going to put this here, and you're going to be lining this guy up right to there. So screw together, screw together. Ideally, if you got a nice flat place to put this on to do it, like another board, it'll just make lining up everything easier. Line this guy up to the back edge, get it nice and level, drive in your screws. And you can always drill a couple extra holes in it afterwards to add some additional screws to it, which will certainly help. And try not to trip over your mic cable like I just did. All right. Fortunately, I'm having to use my wired mic because my cordless mic decided to die. So, got to get another one of those. All right. Here's that one, and I'm using my drill so you guys don't get a bunch of wonderful impact noises in your ear. All right, let's get that out of my way. Line this guy up here. And as you can see, that helps it just line up a little bit easier. Of course, little screw holes are sticking out a little bit. It's really not going to be an issue. Just smack that guy down, it'll go nice and flat. So, let's grab our screws. And again, it doesn't have to be at 100% perfect. It just got to be pretty, you know, just has to be close. That guy. All right. There's your first one. Now, as you can see, with these thinner ones, you got a little bit of flex. We'll fix that in a moment. Same thing. That guy. Again, got a flat board to set that on, it makes it easier. So let me grab another flat board. All right, so got another flat board. These little screw holders like this are very handy for when you're doing jobs like this. Gives you an extra hand, basically. Once you get it there, pull that on back. That way you can actually see the screw before you hit the bottom. All right, that you've got those two frames. Now let me grab another little bit and we will make this thing a little bit more stable. Now for tying these guys together at the base, what I like is something like these Spax. They're nice for tying stuff like this together. These are a 4-inch job, so they'll go through there, get a little bit into the base, and you can buy them in a big box, or you can buy them individually. But this just helps tie these guys together by throwing one in the middle. Do the same thing to this guy. And now, see, no more flex. Flex is all gone. Simple. All right, so now we need a board that goes from there to here. Now if you have 4x4s, it's a little easier because they have flat sides. These are rounded, these take a little bit more effort, but I'll show you the simplest approach for cutting angles and getting these things put together. Ideally, you have a set of sawhorses. Makes this process easier. If not, you can still do it all on the ground. That works too. So, lay your piece up on here, grab your board, stack that guy on there, find your Sharpie, there we go. Basically, you're wanting to get this guy so it's lined up pretty much just about on that end and just about on that end. So this is overlapping. So come under here, place your Sharpie on the bottom, draw yourself a little line, keep it held, come back over here, same thing on the flat side. Now you've marked your angles. So now you got an angle there, and we got an angle there. Now you know where you need to cut. That'll give you an angle that's going to be pretty close to the end of this guy, pretty close to the end of that. Again, close is all you need. It doesn't have to be perfect. For this, I normally use my skill saw, cut through here, because these angles usually go past where you can easily do on a miter saw. So this makes it easier to get these very shallow angles without having to try and figure out how am I going to get that on the miter. Line up your blade, cut away. And now the reason for the Sawzall is when you cut it like that, you only end up getting about, half or a little bit more than halfway through the board. But now you have a nice little groove that you can throw the Sawzall in and finish the cut. Alright, so your board cut. Now you can line this guy up. And if you set it up on your sawhorses just like so, generally, ta-da, there's your L. So we're going to throw some screws in that. And again, this is what I like those Spax screws for. You could also do, that's a shallow enough piece that you could use the 3-inch wood screws. That would work too. Spax screws just have a little bit more meat to them. Tasty beverage time. I got a little bit of clouds overhead, so it's cooled down some. That's always nice. There's your first angle. And that is what we're looking to build, both sides. Again, doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be close. A little bit of slope or whatever angle on here, again, it's not going to affect anything that we're building. Screws are going to go into this guy deep enough, everything's going to be held on just fine. Obviously, easier with 4x4s because no rounded bits, easier to make everything perfectly square, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So let me build the other one. All right, and now we have two of them. So when you're setting up solar, a good idea, buy one of these little angle guys. This will help you mount your stuff and set angles to wherever is appropriate for whichever place in the country or world you happen to be. So take your angle piece, 0 degrees is this. You put that on there and that'll tell you approximately what angle these guys are. This works out to about 55 degrees, which again, your sun is going to be down. You're trying to catch it low in the evening and low in the mornings. Your sun's going to, you want it, ideally when it's coming up through there. It's going to hit its peak somewhere around, an hour before noon for the morning stuff. It'll hit its peak earlier in the evening, but that'll give you a nice little bump on either side, and that helps expand out your hours of solar in your array, particularly when you have a yard like mine that has lots of trees on both sides. So you only have a little spot in the middle that has a few hours of sun in that middle. This allows you to pick up that early morning sun and allows you to pick up that late in the evening sun. So again, 55 degrees. That's where this guy's sitting at. Yep, spot on, 55. So now we're gonna basically put our board between this. Now, if you have somebody that can help you move this thing from one place to another, you can finish building it wherever you have a flat area and then get a second person lift on the other side. 2 people can move this really easily. If you don't have anybody that can lift it, then this is a good idea to take these pieces, take your mid span that's going to go between them and your boards, move them to where you're going to actually put it, and finish assembling it on spot. That will save your back, and trust me, you don't want a bad back later in life. So whichever works best for you, that's the approach that I would take. Ideally, you got somebody that can, spare 5 minutes of time, they can pick up a side, and the 2 of you can take it to where it's going. That's by far the easiest approach. So the other bit that you're going to do is for your 2x4s that are going to go up from the ground to here, you want to get those things, again, doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be relatively square. So, the easiest approach, take your tape measure, lay it on the front, put it down to the ground. Now I like to have that bottom board a good, 16 to 18 inches off the ground. That gives place for some of the grass to grow up and not be shading your panel. Then you're not having to go out there and weed eat it every week in the middle of summer when your grass is growing, 5 inches a week. So, put your tape measure flat on that, put it to the ground, go ahead and mark your spot. In this case, I'm going to go with 18 inches, and this is going to be where the bottom of my lower 2x4 is going to end up. Same thing on this side. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just got to be close. And I like to do a couple of marks on there so that you have something to relatively square this thing across. As if you got a square, throw a square across that, draw a line, at an angle meter like that. You can also use that as a flat. Try not to lose your hat. Now you've got a line on across to there. You can then measure from that, make your next mark, and that's where your upper board is going to be. For that, you want your board generally to be relatively close to the top. So 2x4s, which we all know are not 2x4s, but actually, about 3.5. So make your line, mark it to there. And to the very top of this guy here, from that line, we're looking at about 53.25. Let's see what this guy works out to be. Probably will be close, but again, not perfect. And on that line, right at about 53. So about a 1/4 inch difference side to side. So 3.5 is basically right where these screws are for this guy. 3.5 over here, just above where these screws are. So that allows us to basically place our 2x4 here and there on across the top. That'll screw in, and again, that's going to hold the top of our panels. Just go ahead and mark these things out while you're here. It just makes it easier. All right, let's move this stuff to where I'm going to build it. All right, so I've got everything down here. I have my 8-foot landscape timber there, angle. Basically, you want to split the difference, so measure your board, your 2x10. In the case of these, they're actually like 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 longer than actually 10 feet. Take the difference. The landscape timbers are all actually right on at 8 feet, so 96 inches. So subtract the difference, split it in half, mark your ends, and again, it's going to overhang on either side. You can always go back and trim it off with a sawzall or whatnot afterwards. It just has to be close. So let's throw some screws in this guy. For this, I am going to use my impact because it'll be faster. And you're just putting a screw every, 1.5 feet, 2 feet, so that it's anchored well into the board. Try not to overdrive them so you don't end up snapping the heads off and you don't end up splitting the board. All right, so we got that. So now, front to back, you're essentially trying to center this guy, roughly center on these. So, what do we got? Measure from here. That is 38 3/4 for this guy. Should be roughly the same for this one down here. Yep, this one is about 38 1/2. So take your number, split that number in half, and that's going to be your center line. So basically we're going to take 38, split that number in half. And even in heat, I can still do math at 17 inches. Or no. Even in the heat, I can't do math. That is 15, 15 is 30, plus 4, plus 4. So, yeah, so 19 inches. So 19 is what we're going for our center line. All right, so we have 19, 19. Now, you can take that, split it down there, or you can use that to line it to roughly the front edge, you know, put your board on either side of it. Either one will work. I usually just use that to put my board to the center, because again, this is just tying this stuff together. So, stand up your angle. Have some screws ready. Line up your board. And again, if you've got a second person that can give you a hand for this, this certainly makes this easier. You want your boards to be lined up on roughly the same level ground, so you're not fighting against it. So there's that one. Same thing down here. And you see, at this point, it's already wanting to stand. Again, if you need to prop something up, you know, because where little scrap pieces of 2x4 come in handy, so you can line things up. All right, so that, we've got that attached. And as you can see, I got a screw over here that didn't quite go flush. She's flush now. All right. So there's your base. So your base is in. So that, again, she's not tied to anything. She doesn't have their cross beams yet. But you've got the basics of what the frame is going to be. Now, for this, what I normally do, again, if you have a second person to help you, this is when a second person comes in handy. If not, throw a screw on each one of these little lines that you marked earlier, and then you can just set your 2x4s flat on that line, and you don't have to try and hold it while you're screwing everything in. Now you have something to rest your 2x4s on. This makes the process a lot simpler. Now you got a 2x4. Now you got a 2x4. So the main thing is we want our 2x4 overhang to be roughly the same. Now, as you can see, she's squished in a little bit. So we've got to even that out. But the easiest way to do that is figure out our distance between here, and then we're basically going to create that same distance between that on that upper board, put those screws in, and that'll make everything square. Okay, so how do we figure out span across there? Well, we know we've got 96 inches for this board on the bottom. These boards are 120.5. So take your 120.5, subtract 96 from that, and take that number and divide it in half. What you end up with is 12.25. So 12.25, I can come over here and go 12.25. That's 12.25. So that's how far off our two sides currently are. So take this, take a couple screws, come over here, line up this guy so that it's just about in line. Throw a screw in it. And line that up. And we're basically in line. Ta-da! Now lined up side to side. Do the same thing on your bottom. Again, measure 12 1/4 side to side, line that up on the inside edges, throw in your screws, and you have a frame. And man, is it hot. And now if you look at your board edges end to end, what you'll see is they'll be close. Will they be perfect? Again, no. They'll be close. If your panels are going to be really close to the end of your boards, go for the next, size board. So these were, 2x10s, maybe go for 2x12s. That gives you more space. Then you don't have to, try and make everything as perfectly square as possible, because then you're not, dealing with 1/2 inch differences between them. But you want to get them close, and then you can throw in your panels. At this point, you're going to have the basics for your frame. Now, when you put your solar panels on there and tie those things down, they're going to actually, as the solar panels go on there, they're going to basically create additional stiffness for this entire frame. At this point, this is also where, if your ground is not completely level, you need to shim up, throw something underneath a corner or whatever, so that it's not, wobble back and forth. You could do concrete blocks if you wanted to put some concrete blocks under the ground in the corners. That'll obviously make your landscape timbers last a lot longer at that point. Or if this is going to be a short-term thing, 5, 6 years, you could just set it on the ground like this and you're probably going to be just fine. Really depends on how aggressive the creatures are that eat the lumber in your area. Treated landscape timber, it's going to last for a fair amount of time in this setup. So that's the basic of the frame. Now let's throw some panels on it. All right, so we got a frame in place. These are the Q-cell solar panels that I'm using. So these are basically the little clamps you can get off of Amazon. Normally these would have the little screw and a little piece that would go into your normal solar rack rails. In case of this, we're just throwing a screw through the bottom, And for this, I'm using, just because I happen to have them, some little 1.5 inch. These are basically concrete anchor type screws. The nice part about these, they're really heavy duty, they're really strong. They screw into the wood just fine, but they can handle a lot of load because they're designed to basically handle being screwed into concrete and not snapping. So put a couple of these guys at the bottom, and that's then we'll just lift our solar panel, set it on top, line it up to the edges, get it as close to the edges as possible, and then we'll be ready for our next one. So the process of this, let's go ahead and lift this guy into place. So put her on back. Put the cables back behind. Make sure you don't get any of your cables trapped in there. This guy is trying to get stuck. Now you can come along here, and basically what you're going for is, I want to get this guy so it's relatively close to the edge of your top board. The bottom's basically going to be supported by that. Your top is basically being supported by this. So the closer you can get it to this edge, and again, this is why you can be close, but you don't have to be perfect, because you've got some adjustment room that you can play with here. So that is holding you in place. So at that point, you're ready to measure and put in your next set of lower clamps, and you can set your. And at that point, you can set your next one in place. So let me knock out these next two panels, and we'll be back. All right, so you can see I've got the second panel installed, and I've got the mid bracket, mid clamp there. Of course, we got a plane flying overhead. So let's talk about that again. So, first panel, setting on its brackets. Second panel, setting on its brackets. You use the mid clamp as basically a spacer between them. So when I go and set a panel in place, and I take the mid spacer, basically put that, do a little mark right here, and then a couple inches over is where I put my next set of clamps. Now, as you can see with the mid clamp is only just barely a little bit smaller than one of these. You could probably, if you line these things up absolutely perfect, you could probably get away with using one of these to span both instead of the extra one, but it's 2 extra clamps, and it just makes it easier for setting everything up. Then you don't have to worry about everything being absolutely 100% precise for putting this thing together. Those couple extra clamps that you're going to use for this, trust me, are worth it for just not the headaches of everything having to be 100% perfectly lined up. I'm on my second shirt because it is really hot out here. So let's throw in the last solar panel, and we'll throw in the mid clamps, and you'll see what it looks like when it's done. All right, so we now have 3 solar panels in place. You can slightly shift things side to side as need be, line things up, make things as even as possible. If you want to do additional mid clamps at the bottom, not that you need to, but you could, space them side to side. From that, you got a little bit of slide that you can do. At this point, we're going to throw some screws in those mid clamps up there. Because of those being smaller, we're going to use those with some washers. And for this, I just happen to have a couple fender washers, but ideally you want to find a washer that's going to work with your wood screws so that you're not just pulling straight through the thing. I'm, again, using what I happen to have on hand, but if you're going to go and buy this stuff, I'll put some links below make it easy for you to find what you need and go from there. So these are going into that 2x4. It's in the back. And again, a smaller washer would be better for that, but use what you got. You have stuff on the shelf, just makes it easier. Then you're not having to go out and buy anything. The whole point of this thing is get something up, get some power coming in, get it going. You can always go back and do some stuff with it later. Now, that tightens that guy down. And to get these screws into the bottom, you'll probably have to lift up just a hair. And that will allow you to drive in your screw at the bottom. That there, you now have 3 panels mounted on a frame. Now, if you want to do 6 panels on this frame, you could turn them 2 and 2. You do 2x4s going up, and I would probably go with 2x12s instead of 2x10s at that point. But you could do, you know, multiple boards up, and we'll probably do a variation on that with this same frame on a future video, just to show you, you know, how you can basically mount 6 panels instead of 3. But this gets you 3 panels up, and for less than $100 to basically put this together, and it'll get you several years. This gets your solar power going quickly, and that's the goal. With this setup, I'll now pick up some additional wattage early in the morning, which will help boost my solar power for this time of year in the summer. This will be the last bit that picks it up. As you can see, I've got these 3 here that are going to add in. And then we have these 9 over here. So these guys start picking up solar this time of year in the summertime. You know, we're late July. These guys start picking up solar at around 8:30 in the morning. They're at their peak power by 8:30 or 9. And they'll carry that power at a nice little flat curve till about noon, 1 o'clock. So with these guys here, that'll add in another, you know, 25% on top of these guys. And that will, with luck, help me boost my solar power so that I can carry it later into the evening. My main limitation right now is battery storage. I've got a 13 kilowatt hour battery bank, and then 2 roughly 5 kilowatt hour battery banks. So I'm, you know, total I'm at about 23 kilowatt hours. I'm using probably about 18, 19 or so of those kilowatt hours. The rest is left in reserve. That, of course, lets the batteries go longer, last more cycles, but that also eliminates issues where power goes out in the middle of the night while you're asleep, and then everything shuts off within an hour or so. This gives me, you know, a couple hours overnight before things start shutting down if everything's turned on. With that, we have another array. Talk to you all later. Bye.